I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
It will go away, just stay calm.
We don't have time to be totally politically correct in this country.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. Will you shut up, man?
And welcome everybody. I think we're all here on Facebook and on Zoom. My name's Steve Taylor. I'm the editor and publisher of the Rio Grande Guardian. So pleased to be with you and with these very special guests today for a webinar brought to you by the Olof Palme Center in Mexico City. The subject being US elections 2020, the impact on North America. Delighted to have three experts in this field with me. We have Dr. Duncan Wood, Director of the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute. Welcome, Duncan.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Steve.
Welcome. And Dr. Cristina Rosas from the Olof Palme Center for Analysis and Research on Peace, Security and Development. Cristina, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
And finally, but not least, Dr. Stephen Randall, Professor Emeritus at the University of Calgary in Canada. Stephen.
Hello, everyone.
Nice to see you. And so this webinar, as I mentioned, is going to be an analysis of our thoughts, the thoughts of our three experts today on what the 2020 presidential election is going to mean for North America as a continent. We will talk talk about some of the big issues, like what the impact might be for international relations, for trade, immigration, security, etc. And we will also open it up for questions from our audience on Facebook. So there'll be questions coming in soon, which I hope we'll have time to ask towards the latter half of the show. But to start off with, we're going to have the three guests today giving opening remarks. So Dr. Cristina, as you've been heavily involved in helping set all this up, perhaps you would like to go first. Opening remarks on the US elections 2020 and their potential impact on North America.
Thank you, Steve Taylor. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Duncan Good and Stephen Randall for this session. I believe we need more analysis on US elections and the way they impact our countries. So I celebrate we're having this session. And that said, let me move quickly to the points I would like to make. First of all, I would like to ask you to picture an image that was quite common before Trump became president. By that I mean, you may remember President Peña Nieto with President Obama and Prime Minister Trudeau, who gathered together in Ottawa back in 2016 for a North American Leaders Summit. They had the Canadian Parliament as background, and I'm sure you remember that. That gathering was quite frequent since 2005 because the three leaders decided to develop an initiative in Spanish. The initiative is, the acronym is ASPAN. It is the Prosperity and Security Partnership for North America that was a result of the 9/11 attacks and also the increased activities of organized crime in Mexico. So the three countries decided to work together on, border security, intelligence gathering, and so. And a byproduct of ASPAN was this North American Leaders Summit that starting in 2005 continue every year. Of course, there were some years when they didn't happen, but the last time we saw the North American leaders together was in 2016. This is to say that under Trump, we haven't had any North American Leaders Summit. Why? Well, mostly because Trump favors bilateral over trilateral relations. He prefers to talk to Mexico directly, to push Mexico on migration, on trade issues. He prefers to talk to Canada directly, to push him on trade, security issues, etc. And this prevents Mexico and Canada from talking to each other. That said, of course, Mexico under López Obrador has not been very eager to talk to Canada anyway. But I believe that under Biden-Harris administration, we may be seeing again, or we hope there is a revival of these North American summits. Why is this important to me? The development of these summits is relevant because it creates the sense of a North American community. I'm sure you know Mexico has this identity problem. Mexico is a North American country. It's also a Latin American country, a Central American country. But at the end, it is very important to have a framework, a political framework, to discuss issues of common interest with the US and Canada. And I believe this may come back under a Biden-Harris administration, hopefully. Having said that, I would like to move quickly to what I believe are the three pillars of US-Mexican relations. These pillars are security, trade, and migration. Speaking about security, of course, organized crime has become a national security issue in the US, especially because, as I'm sure you know, Mexican criminal organizations have activities and presence in most American cities and counties. Under George W. Bush and the Calderon administration, it was developed an initiative, the so-called Merida Initiative, that started in 2008 without Canada. Canada doesn't participate in this initiative. And this initiative is important because it implies recognition of a shared responsibility approach in dealing with drug trafficking, drug lords, and organized crime. The Merida Initiative provides money to improve combat and human capabilities in Mexico and some Central American countries. The money that was authorized by the US Congress, because this is an initiative that needs to pass the approval of the Congress, the US Congress, the money approved was $2.8 billion during a 10-year period, and that money was almost completely used. That's good news. But with Donald Trump, he doesn't seem to be very enthusiastic about the Merida Initiative, and neither López Obrador, which is, a problem. And they're not enthusiastic for different reasons. Trump, for instance, has not canceled the Merida Initiative, but has reoriented it to combating drug production, improving border interdiction and port security, and combating money laundering. But last September 16, the very day of the Mexican independence anniversary, Donald Trump warned Mexico about Mexico's crackdown on drug trafficking. So if he's reelected, he may be pushing harder on the issue. Under a Biden-Harris government, the urge to chase cartels and to stop drug trafficking into the US may increase. You may remember Kamala Harris as prosecutor. She chased several Mexican cartels operating in California. And also there's been a lot of talk within the Democrat environment about legalization of marijuana consumption. That may become an issue, although Democrats seem at this point to have put a halt on that. Drugs consumption is a major public health concern in the US. Life expectancy in the US, this is shocking to some, has decreased in 2016-2017 due to drug overdose involving synthetic opioids and methamphetamines. And there's a lot of pressure by Americans to fight this, and both Trump and Biden may have to deal with this, and hopefully they can design better approaches to this problem. Now, speaking about trade, you may remember that Trump changed the perception of threats to national security. For him, trade and migration are major concerns in terms of national security. And this, speaking about trade, this has led Trump to the negotiation of a new free trade agreement that would take the place of the NAFTA. He said that NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement that came into force in 1994, was the worst trade deal ever. And he considered the trade deficit a major concern for US national security. That has also prompted Trump to develop a trade war against China and virtually everyone in the world, including America's closest allies. So as a result of the bad press that NAFTA got during the beginning of the Trump administration, Mexico and Canada decided to accept a negotiation of a new free trade deal, the USMCA. And well, the USMCA has been designed according to Trump's wishes, but this is an agreement that is different from NAFTA. It includes provisions on environmental, labor, and anti-corruption issues that may put Mexico in a difficult situation, either under a Trump, either under a Biden government. Why? Because, well, speaking about, for instance, investment provisions, the López Obrador government has reversed many provisions when it comes to investment in the energy sector. You may know that López Obrador decided to stop investment in clean energies that has harmed the interests of Canadian, American, and European investors, and that is also creating a very bad atmosphere in Mexico when it comes to foreign investment or when it comes to getting benefits from the USMCA. So under Trump, a new Trump or a Biden administration, Mexico may be punished for not complying with the provisions stated in the USMCA when it comes to energy and also when it comes to other provisions. Remember, Kamala Harris voted against the USMCA on environmental concerns. Also, please don't forget that the Democrats are very linked to trade unions, so labor issues are in the spotlight, and the Mexican government may be having a hard time in dealing with them. And finally, speaking about migration, well, migration is a big issue. Migration is considered by Trump another national security threat, and as you know, President Trump has pushed Mexico very hard on migration issues. Virtually, Mexico is a third safe country. And well, migration may worsen due to the economic recession we are facing all over the world. And of course, in Mexico, migration pressures may increase at a time when anti-migration feelings all over the world, and of course in the US, are also increasing due to the economic unrest that the pandemic is creating. So here are my initial arguments, and well, I'm looking forward to hearing to Duncan and Stephen Randall analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Cristina, for that. You brought up a lot of topics there. Hopefully we're going to get time to delve into some of those in more detail as this webinar progresses. I'd like to move along now to Dr. Stephen Randall. Your opening remarks, Dr. Stephen, on the US elections and the impact it may have on North America.
Thanks very much. I'd like to go a little more broadly than just the North American environment with some of the comments, at least. I think certainly to look at this from a Canadian perspective, not just a North American one, Canada has traditionally had and still has only one major priority, and that is to ensure continued access to the American market. 3/4 of Canadian export trade is with the United States. Canada exports more to the United States than the United Kingdom, Japan, and China combined. And protecting that market, and Maria Cristina and everybody else on the panel are well aware of this, that protecting that market access has been the critical objective from the US-Canada Free Trade Agreement in the 1980s through the negotiation of NAFTA, and of course into the most recent US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. So market access has been absolutely critical. And I don't think there is any question that it doesn't matter whether Trump or Biden, Republicans or Democrats are in power. The trade issues that have arisen that relate to softwood lumber, to steel, and to aluminum are going to be there regardless of which party is actually in power. The second point that I'd want to make, I think of a very general nature, is that Canadians are very anxious to see multilateralism return to a respectable focus on the part of any US administration. As a second ranking power, Canada has always committed to multilateralism, and hence it likes the North American environment where all three countries are working together, and was very concerned, of course, when Trump engaged in a kind of divide and conquer, trying to negotiate with the Mexicans, yes, putting Canada aside, etc. And as we know, Trudeau didn't even attend the meeting in Washington with Lopez Obrador and Trump. So there were some divisions there, which I think are very unhealthy for the North American environment. But on the multilateralism, I mean, Canada would like to see the United States make a much more significant rhetorical as well as ongoing financial support to NATO, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, to the United Nations, and so on down the line. I mean, these are fundamental issues in Canadian approach to foreign policy. Canadian policy is premised not only on multilateralism, but on the rule of law. And we have seen that disintegrate during the Trump administration. So there's not much question where Canadians would stand on the difference between Trump and the Democratic Party and Biden on general foreign policy issues. In terms of much more specific questions, of course, energy and the environment are clearly two of the issues that I think will affect the entire North American region. And there are regional differences within Canada about the preference for Republican versus Democrats. If you ask most of the country, which they prefer, it's clearly Biden and the Democrats, but in the province where I happen, for better or worse, to live, and that's the province of Alberta, which is a major exporter of oil in various forms and of natural gas, there's concern that that the Biden administration, would continue to oppose the XL pipeline, which is held up in the courts, opposed strongly by environmentalists, both in the United States and in Canada, and that there would be a much less favorable energy policy in the United States in terms of Alberta and perhaps Saskatchewan as well. But those are specific issues, and they relate really to one province. If you look at Canadian policy more generally, the Trudeau administration comes back to a point that Maria Cristina was making. The Canadian government is committed to green energy policy, carbon reduction, greenhouse gas reduction. That would be very consistent with a Democratic administration in the United States, and I suspect to some extent to the direction in which Mexico might go as well. But it flies in the face of Alberta's preferences, which of course are to continue to pump out greenhouse gases and to export either to the Pacific or to the United States through the Keystone XL pipeline, if it ever is finished. And now, of course, Trump has committed financial support to a railroad between Alaska and Alberta to move, again, Alberta oil. So I think there are some fundamental differences in that regard. One last area, of course, is the question of defense. The Trump administration is not the only Republican administration that has admonished Canada for not spending more on defense, but it has been particularly vitriolic in the case of the Trump administration. But I don't think that's going to go away. I mean, the Bush administration previously was strongly critical, especially after 9/11, that Canada wasn't spending enough on defense, that we weren't contributing enough to NATO. Those are broader issues that go beyond the North American environment. But the integration, the defense integration, security integration of Canada and the United States is so close, it really doesn't matter which party is in power. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense System, is well established. It's not going to go away whether Democrats or Republicans are in power. But we would anticipate a much smoother general relationship with the Democrats currently than we have with the Trump administration. So I'll stop there, Steve Taylor.
Thank you, Dr. Steen Randolph. And now finally, in our opening remarks here, Duncan Wood, take it away.
Thank you, Steve. It's always good to go last because people have said all the intelligent things. So now I can say something that, well, I guess is a little bit off the wall. I'll try my best. But first of all, let me just say thank you to Maria Cristina for the invitation. It's very important for the Mexico Institute to have collaborative projects with research centers in Mexico and to reach a Mexican audience, which is, we reach them through our own events, but I think it actually is highly productive for us to work together on these things. So thank you for that. And it's great to see Steve Randall there and to be able to collaborate with our Canadian colleagues as well. As many of you know, I lived in Canada for 6 years. I did my master's and PhD there before I lived in Mexico for 17 years and now in the United States for 8 years. So I'm a true North American without being a citizen of any of the countries. My marriage history tells the same thing. So, I've been through 3 now and, I'm working my way through the region. So let's talk about these issues. First of all, let me make a point about the video that was shown at the beginning of this event. It was, I think, deliberately provocative, the footage that was chosen. I understand that. But I think there's something very important that was missing there. Well, first of all, there was no Biden really, apart from him saying, "Oh, shut up, man," right? But, we don't have as much idea about what Biden wants as we do about Trump for obvious reasons. Trump has been president for 4 years. But when you actually begin to look at the Biden campaign platform, there's lots of clues in there, I think. And for those people who are watching this event, I urge you to go to the Biden website and just to have a look with a critical eye about what is in the Biden platform there. Secondly, I think that the video failed to capture what a large number of Americans feel about Donald Trump, which is they love him. I mean, he may not be your cup of tea. He may not be your cup of atole, but he is certainly a popular figure. Just look at the people who went up to Walter Reed Hospital when he was in there the other night to stand outside and show their support for him. He is a divisive character, but people love him. Why do they love him? Well, for a number of reasons. The most obvious one is that the economy has done well under Donald Trump. And a lot of people would say, well, that was happening anyway. And of course, there is evidence to support that. But the economy has continued to do well. The stock market has done incredibly well. If you're a middle-class American, your pension has grown very, very rapidly. And that's what a lot of people in this country see. That doesn't generate love, but that does generate support for him. Secondly, Trump speaks in such a way and I think that a lot of our Mexican viewers will understand this, he speaks in a kind of language that people understand, in the similar way that Andrés Manuel López Obrador speaks in a way which doesn't necessarily carry over successfully into the university atmosphere or amongst the elites, but to the man and woman in the street, the working man and woman. It makes sense, and the kind of language and the delivery makes sense, and that's true with Donald Trump as well. Look at the way in which they both handle their rallies. I think that's it, and you begin to see that, you know, Donald Trump has a way of communicating with his voting base that is very, very successful. And thirdly, I think there are certain issues, in particular social issues like abortion, that make him very, very popular, passionately so amongst some people. The evangelical community, Catholics, etc. I mean, I was talking with a Republican friend of mine the other day, and we went through issue after issue on which she disagreed with the president, but she said, look, I'm a one-issue voter. It's abortion for me. I'm pro-life. And because I'm pro-life, I'm going to vote for Donald Trump because I don't want there to be pro-choice president in the White House. I'm like, wow, you're giving up a lot there, but okay, that's your choice. This is a democracy. So I think that's important just to sort of set the stage here. If we, to answer your question, Steve, you know, obviously with Trump, we're going to see a lot of continuity. In the bilateral relationship with Mexico, migration will continue to be a problem. As many of us know, the numbers of Central Americans reaching the southwest border of the United States has dropped off dramatically, but numbers of Mexicans coming up there are growing. Just while we've been on this call, I've had a couple of texts about it. People saying, you know, can you give us some insight into that? And partly that's a reflection of the organized crime groups recruiting Mexicans for human smuggling and trafficking into the United States. Partly it's that. Partly it is because economic conditions have worsened in many parts of Mexico. And so you're seeing higher levels of migration. And, you know, whereas we were seeing, you know, more Central Americans than Mexicans being captured at the southwest border, the latest figures have it at around 70% of those people who are picked up are Mexican now. That's a big, big jump now in recent months. So migration will continue to be, I think, the center, the core of the bilateral relationship between the United States and United States and Mexico under a Trump administration. And I think that Andrés Manuel López Obrador has been willing to go along with that. He's recognized quite intelligently, in my opinion, how important the migration issue is to Trump and to his voters, because that's what Trump promised really during the campaign. And so the strategy which has been pursued by AMLO and his team in the bilateral relationship is give the Americans what they want on migration, and they'll leave us alone on most other things. And there are exceptions. There's pressure on drugs. There was the pressure, of course, over NAFTA, USMCA, but we got through that. And so largely, it's in order to keep the peace with Washington, AMLO is willing to continue collaborating on migration. And I think that we would continue to see that being the case. But that creates a problem for AMLO, because if there is a change of administration, then obviously migration is no longer going to be the issue with which he can appease his counterpart in the White House. Under Biden, things will be a lot more complex, I think, for AMLO. Under Biden, we will see a very different approach. It's going to be institutional, not personalized. Biden has a long history of working through institutions. Neither Trump nor AMLO are institutionalists. They are very personal politicians. And so it's been a good meeting of minds, if you like. But there's going to be a clash here with a Biden presidency, because Biden is going to want to build institutions in the bilateral relationship, and there will be pressure to do so, diplomatic pressure to do so. USMCA under Biden will obviously be embraced by the administration because it has so many of the things that, in fact, Democrats have wanted for years. And most importantly, those tighter regulations, restrictions on labor. And that's what I think we're going to see one of the first points of tension under a potential Biden presidency, is that they will pursue challenges against the Mexican government through the United States Trade Representative over labor conditions in Mexico. It's all set up. The framework is there. All the pieces are in place to make that happen. And that will be a difficult, very difficult conversation for the Mexicans to have with their US counterparts. Perhaps the biggest issue, though, for the Biden administration is climate. And we will see a return to the United States as a champion of climate change mitigation. The United States will return to the Paris Accord, and there will be pressure from the Biden administration on Mexico to not only continue to support the Paris Accord, but to begin to take the steps internally, in other words, in energy policy, to show that Mexico is committed to climate change mitigation. One area where I'm pretty certain that Biden and AMLO will have a lot to talk about, because they share this concern, is over corruption. And as many of you know, in USMCA, there is, in one of the chapters, a language which talks about collaboration over corruption and anti-corruption. And from what I learned from the Biden campaign is there will be a focus on anti-corruption measures on a bilateral basis, and presumably on a trilateral basis with Canada as well. You know, let's not forget that Canada is not immune from corruption conversations. So I think that those things will be there. And lastly, nobody has really talked about health so far. Public health is the new issue that we will see globally and, of course, at the regional level. Prior to this pandemic, we had a North American plan for animal and pandemic influenza. It worked very well during the H1N1 crisis. It was perfected after that, and then it was ignored in the current crisis. We need to revisit that. And I predict that sometime in early 2021, under a Biden administration, we will see a focus on an institutional approach to update that collaborative mechanism in North America over how to fight pandemics. And it will include all kinds of issues, not just to do with health and the pharmaceutical industry, but to do with the economy and what counts as an essential industry, as an essential service, and essential personnel, so that they can continue to move back and forth across borders during the next pandemic, because everybody knows there will be another pandemic. And this all leads me just to summarize in the end that Maria Cristina is absolutely right. We will see a return to some form of the North American Leaders Summits. That's something which I think a lot of us in the world of academia and think tanks will welcome, because it provides us with a focal point. Whether or not they are used to their full potential is another question, but we will see, as I said earlier on, a more institutionalized approach to both bilateral and trilateral relations.
Thank you, Duncan. Before we go any further, I'd like to invite the audience on Facebook to submit questions to us, and we'll endeavour to get those to the three guest speakers here today. As we move away from those opening remarks, I'd like to start now with Dr. Stephen Randall and ask you, Stephen, when we're thinking of international relations, with regard to this election, do you see anything different in another 4 years of Donald Trump with relations between the US and Canada? Or will there be something different, and what might that international relationship be with Canada, the US and Canada, if there's a Biden administration?
Well, I think that to take the Trump side, first of all, I think there's, let's take energy, not just general foreign policy, but in the area of energy, Trump is a deregulator. He supports fracking. He supports coal. He supports he supports the oil and gas industry. Albertans in the energy sector would love him for all of those reasons. Makes me uncomfortable. But, if you scratch the average person who's currently unemployed in the energy sector in Alberta, they have a very different perspective than I do about the environment and the energy sector. That's one. More broadly, I think we would continue to see unpredictability in trade policy from a Trump administration. And, neither politics nor business likes unpredictability. I mean, 1 minute we have aluminum tariffs being slapped on, steel tariffs being slapped on. They're used as carrots and sticks in many respects. And the lack of predictability in trade policy, which we've seen with Trump, has been a very unfortunate dimension. And I don't see any reason why that would change. I mean, that's the nature of his personality. That's how he does deals, if you wish. With Biden, I think we would have a much higher level of predictability. And I think, as Duncan pointed out, we would have a far more institutional approach to issues like trade, energy, the environment, and so on down the line, which I think is clearly preferable to the kind of ad hocery that we see from the Trump administration over the last 3.5+ years. But, you know, I think there are regional differences in Canada in terms of the views.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention in asking that question of Stephen that perhaps the format could be that the other two speakers are welcome, Maria, Cristina, and Duncan, to respond to Stephen's remarks, and we'll do it that way as we have this discussion. So if any of you want to pick up on that, on Stephen's remarks.
In fact, I have a question for Stephen. And this has to do with something that Duncan mentioned already about the empathy, the existing empathy between López Obrador and Trump on personal basis. Would you see a Biden administration closer to Trudeau than closer to López Obrador? I know this is a difficult question, but ideologically speaking, because Biden is more institutional, as has been already mentioned, would you see that under Biden, he would be closer to Trudeau than to López Obrador?
Oh, I don't think much question that would be the case. I mean, Biden has been here recently. I think he and Trudeau certainly would have an effective working relationship. I think we also have to remember, and I think Duncan perhaps alluded to this in his reference to institutional approaches. Trump does not represent anybody. And it's unclear that the Republican Party even exists any longer, or in what form it actually exists. Whereas Biden is still the product, in spite of what he said in the debate the other week, he still is the product of the Democratic Party. I mean, there is a party behind him which has policies, preferences. So the extreme left of the party is further left than he is, but he does have to deal with party orientation. And I think the party's orientation is much closer to what the Canadian Liberal government is currently than it ever would be to Trump. So I would see an effective working relationship. I think the same is true of potentially of Biden's working relationship with Mexico.
Steve, if I can just jump in here, I think that there are a number of areas where Andrés Manuel will coincide with Biden. And, you know, I talked in my opening comments about the visiting the Biden website and seeing the campaign platform there. You know, his the main axis of what he's putting forward is this program called Build Back Better, which is about, you know, reconstruction essentially after the COVID pandemic. A lot of focus on the traditional issues you will hear, including infrastructure, etc. But at the heart of that is this idea of Buy America. And that's something which has been around for a while. I mean, since the early 2000s. But what Biden says in that platform is he says, you know, we will no longer allow companies and the government to go around Buy American. You know, so many said a lot of government purchasing ends up buying goods that are made in China or other parts of the world. Doesn't provide any evidence for that, okay? But he says they have to be made here in the United States. Now, behind the scenes, his people tell me that Canada and Mexico will be given an exemption on that, okay? Because of USMCA and the rules that exist there. But there's no doubt that there is a heavy component of economic nationalism in the Biden campaign. And that's something that he shares with Andrés Manuel López Obrador. You know, I mean, here in the United States, of course, we have this debate all the time. Is Andrés Manuel a leftist? Is he a populist? And I say, look, the best way to describe him, I would say, is actually as a nationalist. I mean, he's a nationalist. He wants things made here in Mexico. He wants the Mexican state-owned oil company to be great again, make Pemex great again. He wants their CFE to the utility to be strong again. It's all about that idea of Mexican nationalism, I think. Even his focus on Mexican history is really about that. It's about engendering pride in Mexico. And there I think we will see some kind of meeting of minds with a potential Biden presidency. And in the case of Trudeau, I mean, Trudeau is, of course, like any Canadian leader, he's patriotic. I mean, he's proud of the symbols, but you wouldn't say that he was on the same level as some of the recent conservative leaders that we've seen in Canada in terms of strident nationalism that's out there. And certainly I would say that, that's been, one of the issues that has separated him out from both AMLO and from Trump over the past couple of years.
Thank you for that.
Could I say something about that? Because I believe this is of critical importance due to the USMCA. Now, I was checking some figures. The US is having a record trade deficit of $63.5 billion. That has to do mostly to the fact that Trump government has provided an extensive stimulus package that bolstered consumer spending, imports during the crisis, and also is a shift of consumer spending from domestic services, for instance, restaurants, bars, movie theaters, because they're closed due to the pandemic. And now there is a larger share of imports in total consumer spending. So this binational and this economic nationalism may be challenging the USMCA. And also this destroys some of the arguments of Trump. Make America great again. Try to diminish the trade deficit. The trade deficit has, in fact, grown enormously. So.
Let me, can I just add, I want to pick up on Duncan's point, if I might.
Mm-hmm.
He's absolutely right, Duncan's absolutely right about the Democratic Party nationalism, and it's not just Biden, it's the party itself. I mean, we have to remember that without the Democratic Party, Clinton would never have gotten the North American Free Trade Agreement through Congress. It was supported by Republicans, not by Democrats. I think there will be exemptions, as Duncan pointed out, in terms of the Buy America program. But the issue of nationalism on procurement policy, for example, is a big challenge potentially. But we're going to see continued high levels of cross-border trade. That just can't be undermined. And the bottom line is, regardless of who's in power, it's the professionals, not the politicians, who run the day-to-day business among the three countries, and that's probably all to the good.
I think that's very much the case, perhaps up until the Trump administration. Some people maybe differ on that, but let's, as Duncan quite rightly brought up the question of healthcare, let's bring our first question in from a member of the audience on Facebook, Fernanda Suarez. And I'll send this back to Duncan if he wants to take a shot at this. Fernanda Suarez would like to know the take of the panelists, well, all three actually then, on whether Trump getting COVID-19 and apparently recovering rapidly, will that benefit his re-election chances? And has he taken advantage of this case to downplay the threat of that the virus possesses?
Thank you, Fernanda. It's a really, really good question. As always, when these kind of things happen, conspiracy theories abound. It's like, was he really infected? How bad is it? Did they give him experimental treatments? They're going to kill him later. It's like, well, first of all, let's just put those aside. Okay. Second of all, the early polling that's out there, and this is really preliminary. So if you visit 538.com, Nate Silver's website, you'll see all the latest polls that are there. Most of the polls don't actually reflect this yet because the polling data since Trump went into hospital hasn't come out yet. But what pollsters are saying is they're picking up that, in fact, this is not good for the president. And there was a piece in the New York Times today about this, which is that it seems to be weakening his support, if anything. Certainly the debate wasn't good for him last week. The debate apparently saw him lose maybe a percentage point nationally. And we all know that the national numbers don't matter. It's all about the state-by-state numbers, but that's what the early evidence suggests. My own prediction here is that in a state like Florida, where Trump is already behind but was closing the gap, I don't think this is good for the president, because it shows to a lot of the aging voters there, the more senior voters who are already very concerned about coronavirus. It shows them that, you know, this is a real thing. If they wanted to believe the president before that it wasn't serious, then now they can see it. And that's why the president is out there today saying, it's no worse than the flu. You're fine. Don't be afraid of it. You know, that's why we're seeing that kind of messaging. I think to his more fervent base, like the kind of folks who show up to his political rallies, his campaign rallies, this is a great thing for them. They love to see the president fighting the pandemic or fighting the virus and beating it like that. He lives up to their expectations there. And, you know, it's very macho in that sense. And just a little aside here, remember that in 2016, you know, about 1/3 or slightly less, around 30% of Latino voters in the United States voted for Trump. There is some indication this time around that those numbers may increase, not by a lot, but maybe up to around 32% of Latino voters. And certainly it's speculated that that more macho approach plays out really well. With other voters, it's less than macho, but it's the fact that Trump is high energy. And this was the big fear, I think, with him getting COVID. You know, as most of you, I'm sure, know, one of the most important enduring symptoms of COVID, you know, lasting months into the illness, is that you are fatigued, you lack energy. And that would not play out well in the second and third debates if they take place, if Trump didn't appear to be as energetic. Because that's one of the things that he has over Biden, is he comes across as being, you know, in some ways, you know, a decade or more younger than Biden, even though he's only a couple of years younger, because he has those high energy levels. And there was another part of the question from Fernanda about, has he missed an opportunity to change the narrative? Yeah, and there was a very nice piece, I think, today in the New York Times about this, which is that apparently some of his advisors were saying to him, look, you've got COVID, now's your chance to show an empathetic side. And I was asked this question earlier on this week, and you know, my answer was, look, Trump is Trump. He can't change. He's not going to suddenly become empathetic because he got COVID. He's going to be exactly who he is, which is to say, look at my immune system. It's the best in the world. The doctors told me it's tremendous. They've never seen anything like it, et cetera, et cetera. That's who Trump is. And that's that authenticity with Trump. The fact that he's not faking it, you know, that's what makes him so appealing to a lot of voters.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with Duncan, except for the fact that I don't think him having COVID, nor his most unfortunate attitude toward what it meant, which has resulted in very negative reaction. I don't think it'll move the polls one iota. I mean, his base is very strong. Sorry.
No, I just wanted to comment on this. I believe the fact that Trump left the hospital so soon is because he realizes this hasn't been good for his campaign. And his numbers, well, we still need more information, but this may be of critical importance at this point. We are only 3 weeks ahead the elections, so before the elections. And there's another issue that has been addressed by different constituencies within the Democrats. The fact that during the debate of last week on Tuesday, Trump had the virus and he may have give Biden the coronavirus. So that's also of concern. Of course, Biden does not have the virus, but that could have happened, and that's not either good for Trump.
Okay, let's move on to the issue of trade, and I'll stick with you, Maria Cristina, if you can take this question. Has the issue of trade now been settled with the passage of the USMCA? I take your point about Kamala Harris, the VP pick on the Democratic side, voting against it for environmental reasons, but a lot of the Democrats voted for that new trade deal as well. So I think it's going to be steady on the trade front, no matter who wins in November.
Well, as I said, to me and to the experts, the USMCA is a more complex agreement as opposed to NAFTA. It includes provisions on issues not previously considered under NAFTA, such as corruption, and also environmental and labor issues were included in NAFTA, but as side agreements, not as part of the agreement itself. So I believe this USMCA will be heavily scrutinized by Americans and Canadians. And I see many problems in Mexico in complying with the provisions of this agreement, both in labor issues and environmental issues. It's been already mentioned. The fact that the U.S. Embassy will be having experts, American experts on labor issues that will be checking how is Mexico doing at trade unions and such. That is going to be tough for Mexico. And also the environmental issue, I think it's of critical importance because Mexico doesn't seem willing under López Obrador to comply with, carbon emission reductions and to comply with the energy reform that was approved prior to the arrival of López Obrador. So that's going to create a lot of problems for Mexico. And that may impact also foreign investment into Mexico. Foreign investors want security. And the fact that López Obrador is somehow affecting property rights, that is not good for Mexico. That is not good to attracting foreign investment.
Stephen.
I think regardless of who's in power, I mean, in the case of Trump on trade, even with the trilateral agreement, there will always be pot shots taken by the Trump administration. I mean, the trade negotiators are going to deal with the softwood lumber issue. They're going to deal with steel and aluminum on an ad hoc basis. Those problems are going to continue to be there. Overall, trade policy, I think, will be institutionalized, however, as it has been. I don't see much change there, whether it's a Trump administration or a Biden administration. It just will be more pleasant if Biden's in office.
Okay, another topic to discuss today, I think, which would be really good, would be energy. Duncan, is there any difference in energy policy between a Trump administration and a resumption of a Trump administration or a Biden administration? US-Mexico energy issues.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, and before I answer that, because it's a really, really important question, I think, let me just add something to the previous conversation.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I hear a lot of every week is talking to US companies that have invested in Mexico, talking to US companies that do business in Mexico, that they are deeply, deeply concerned about the erosion of institutions, political control of regulatory organs, repealing pro-market reforms from previous administrations, lack of transparency in government procedures, legislation that is being made without consulting industry. And let me just give you one example of that. I was talking to a company in the pharmaceutical space the other day, and they said, look, a lot of these new regulations and laws that are coming through actually are well-intentioned. And so a lot of it is about fighting corruption. And this one company said to me, look, the Morena party in Congress wants to put in place new legislation on labeling, just as we've seen on junk food, but for pharmaceutical. And the difference here is that they want to label pharmaceutical products that are for use in the public health system as for public health use only. And those that are going to private hospitals can be sold as they are. And you say, what's wrong with that? I mean, that makes a lot of sense, because clearly there's a problem with people stealing medicine from the public system and selling it to the private system. And that's stealing from the Mexican public. So I fully support that initiative. The problem is this: the Morena party wants that labeling to be on the internal packaging of the medicine. So instead of it being on the box on the outside, it'll be on the little silver blister pack on the inside, which means that the company has to create an entirely new production line to produce that medicine. And for the amount of medicine that they're going to sell to the public health system in Mexico, they're not going to do it. So they won't be able to sell their medicine in Mexico. Now, for the company, that's lost profits. For the Mexican public, that means they won't have access to that medicine. And that's where I think a lot of the concerns are coming right now. It's that there is an attitude on the part of the AMLO administration not to work with the private sector. And I mean, they talk about it, they say they want the private sector to work with them, but there's not really a collaborative approach. And this will lead, I think, to conditions that will be detrimental for the Mexican public. How does this play out into the bilateral relationship? Well, those same kind of labeling restrictions actually are in violation of international agreements, including USMCA. Government procurement requirements are in violation of USMCA. And so all of these companies that come to me and they talk about their complaints, they're going to USTR, the United States Trade Representative, and they're saying, we need you to defend us down in Mexico City. And that's what's going to happen no matter who wins. Biden or Trump, we will see actions by USTR. Now, in terms of energy, the energy sector, I mean, it was said very well earlier on by Steve that, under Trump, we've seen this idea of energy dominance. It's about, coal and oil and natural gas. Fine. The oil and natural gas side of things is not going to go away under a Biden administration, but there will be a lot more emphasis on renewable energy. And we will see pressure, as I said earlier on the question of climate and on AMLO to try to change his domestic energy policies to support climate change mitigation. And there will be a lot of efforts, I think, in a very gentle, institutional, technical and technological approach, where the United States will try to work with Mexico on renewable energy, climate change mitigation. And I think we'll see a resurrection at the North American level of the annual meeting of the North American Energy Ministers, which was an innovation in 2014. And that led to the creation of the North American Energy Information Committee, Council, whatever it was. Anyway, it was basically this effort. And if you visit the website, they have the maps of North America with all of the energy infrastructure there. It gives you in-depth information about where generating capacity is, where the oil fields are, where the pipelines are, where the transmission lines are, etc. And I can see that we will pick up where that ended in 2016, and we'll start it up again on a regional basis, because there is an interest in Canada to keep that process going. And by including the United States in that effort, Canadian interest in Mexico, and there are many in the energy sector, in both electricity and natural gas in particular, as well as in the oil sector, we will see that there will be a gentle but firm diplomatic pressure to make sure that those interests are protected.
Maria Cristina, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Duncan's absolutely correct. The premier of this province has made it quite clear that if Biden is elected, he will do everything possible to change Biden's mind about the Keystone XL pipeline. So Duncan's right. I mean, oil and natural gas are not going to go away. There'll be debate about fracking. There'll be debate about regulation and deregulation on the whole. But I think on the whole, it's quite clear that we're moving toward an increasing focus on renewables. And there are going to be some outliers in that respect. And I think this province is going to be one of them. The writing is on the wall on the whole. This province, government of this province, United Conservative Party, approved this year open pit mining in the foothills of the Rockies. I mean, the outraged response to that The result has been that the New Democratic Party is now even with the Conservatives in provincial polls, having been thrown out of office just a year ago. So there's a strong, I think, support for renewables, even in provinces like this, which have relied for 50 years on oil and gas exports.
Maria Cristina, anything to add on the energy front?
Well, on a related matter, yes, I'm worried, folks, because well, on the one hand, we have López Obrador reversing the energy reform and supporting polluting energies instead of clean energies. And on the other side, we have the USMCA that came into force last July, and we were expected to benefit from that, to attract investment. But as Duncan has already said, internal legislation in Mexico prevents foreign investors from coming here. And now we have the energy issue that is critical. And also the López Obrador government doesn't want to contract debt. Is not talking to the IDB or the IMF, as opposed to other countries that need, you know, financial support for the post-pandemic scenario. So we are not getting foreign investment due to the USMCA. We are not contracting debt. We are not stimulating foreign investment. Frankly, I don't know what we're going to do. It's a very critical situation we are facing right now in Mexico.
Thank you. Another question from a viewer on Facebook. Sarah, this is still with you, Maria Cristina. It looks a very easy question, but perhaps more complex to answer. She asks, what would be the best possible scenario for Mexico in this US election?
There's no easy answer to that question. As I have suggested before, I believe under a Biden or a Trump administration, we are going to face several challenges. That would be my short answer to a difficult question.
Can I jump in here, Steve? I think that, I mean, there's many ways to answer this question. And the first one is to answer it with another question, which is say, yeah, who's Mexico? All right. If it's Andrés Manuel López Obrador knows how complicated, how complex Trump is, but he's worked out how to play him. Okay. And he's done it very successfully so far. And remember, AMLO's main goal was to prevent the United States from getting too involved in internal affairs in Mexico. And he's managed to do that by keeping them, Trump, happy over the immigration issue. He's bought himself a get out of jail free card, a free pass. All right. But for Mexico as a country, I mean, my personal view is, and, you know, having lived there for 17 years, you know, 2 of my children are Mexican citizens. I want Mexico to be a successful country. I want Mexico to be a prosperous country. I want Mexico to be a safe and secure country. And I feel as though the institutional approach serves those goals better than the more personalized approach. But, you know, with either one of these presidential candidates, you're not going to see a solution to Mexico's problems in the next 4 years. As we all know, these are generational issues, but we have to keep fighting the good fight. What I like about Biden is that there will be a focus on working on anti-corruption issues together. And as we all know, that is not just an AMLO priority, but it has to be a priority for Mexico. And if we can come up with better and more institutional approaches to fighting corruption, not just on a national basis, but on a regional basis, I think that's positive. A lot of people in Mexico that I speak to, and these would be classified as being from the elites. They have long hoped that President Trump will be a check on Andrés Manuel López Obrador, that they would prevent him from going too far on energy, etc. I don't think we have a lot of evidence to support that idea. Would Biden be more of a check? Maybe, but not much. So in terms of what's best, I think that what we have to go with is that, if we believe in the concept of North America, if we believe that the United States, Canada, and Mexico are stronger together, then Biden is a better option from that point of view.
Stephen, Sarah on Facebook has a second question. What's the biggest difference between Biden and Trump with regard to their agenda for their relationship with the European Union?
Well, I think that's a very large question, would require a very lengthy answer, I think, on the whole. It's not just the European Union. I think it's the entire multilateral relationship. I mean, Trump has so badly undermined relations with individual European countries, with individual European leaders, as well as with the European Union, with NATO. I don't think there's anywhere to go except up now in terms of the US relationship with the rest of the world. Is not just with the European Union, which has its own problems.
Okay, let's move on, Maria Cristina, to immigration. I mean, I would imagine that could be one of the biggest changes in immigration policy, particularly important to our region of North America here, just across the river. We have these, what we call tent cities, with so many migrants from Central America just stuck there, unable to have their opportunities for asylum answered, or there's no option at the moment, and COVID has made that even more difficult. So the immigration policies, maybe from a Mexican viewpoint, the difference there between Trump and Biden.
Well, as has been said, for Trump, this has been a critical issue of national security. Trump has invested a lot of money and effort on the wall and on restrictions for migration. He has pushed Andrés Manuel López Obrador to limit migration coming from Central America into the US. And well, that may continue under a second term of Trump. As for the Democrats is concerned, my guess is that there's been a lot of talk about migration reform since the Obama times. I'm not sure this can happen under a Biden administration, mostly because of the economic consequences of the pandemic, because of this nationalism that we have already mentioned in this session. I believe that there is an anti-immigration atmosphere in the US that may work against migration reform, but they will have to deal with it. Probably the Democrats won't be as punitive as Trump, speaking about a wall or money for a wall instead of money for, say, the Merida Initiative, but that will be a key issue either under Trump or either Biden in the years to come.
Steve, I think that one of the dangers that we run when we discuss an issue which is as controversial as migration is that we tend to think in terms of black and white, that, you know, Republicans are hard on immigration and Democrats are soft on it. And the fact is the evidence just doesn't bear that out. The reason why Mexico instituted its Plan Frontera Sur in 2014 was because of pressure from the United States government. And that was the Obama administration. What do a lot of Mexicans who have lived in the United States call President Obama? They called him the deporter-in-chief because there were more deportations under him than under previous presidents. And so, you know, I think we have to recognize that the climate, the political climate in the United States has demanded that presidents of both parties are tougher on migration, on immigration than they have been before. And I have to say that given the political climate today, we're unlikely to see a Biden presidency, stopping that kind of collaboration with Mexico. I think it'll be much Cristina just suggested, it was really about working with the Mexicans to say, you got to do something about your southern border because there's nothing there. And you need to put in place some infrastructure, some protocols, and we're willing to help you. There will be money, there will be funds made available to help the Mexicans do that. And I think that there will be a message from the American administration to say to the Mexican government, keep doing what you're doing in stopping Central Americans from coming through. And that was part of the plan under Obama anyway. It's just it wasn't nearly as aggressive as we've seen. But now you've got there, it's tough to move back, because if you move back, you're soft on immigration. Okay, you don't have to move it forward, but you keep what you've got in place. It's just the same as with the wall. You're not going to dismantle the wall. It's there. If you dismantle the wall, that's political suicide in this country. So what you're going to do is you're going to leave it there, and you just won't build any more of it. Okay, and you'll say that that is the legacy to your predecessors' failed attempts to stop illegal immigration, that you want to go a different way, but you're not going to take it down. It's going to be the same thing, I think, with bilateral cooperation with Mexico on stopping Central American migration. The big issue that's there right now, of course, is these rising numbers of Mexican migrants that are coming north. And whether or not we can see that the AMLO administration is willing to adopt a more expansive fiscal policy to try to create employment and opportunities in Mexico, whether it's willing to be more friendly to investors, both national and foreign, to create more jobs. If that's the case, then we might see those numbers coming down.
Stephen, is there any are there any immigration issues between the US and Canada you want to bring up?
I think yes, the pressure on the Canadian border from refugees fleeing the Trump administration has been a pretty major issue over the last 3.5 years. But we're dealing. I mean, let's face it, we're dealing with minuscule numbers in comparison to the US-Mexico border. It is an issue. There has been I think a fairly strong backlash in some respects against refugee claimants, but there's also been a high degree of support for those refugees. But we do have an agreement in place with the United States that we don't have third-party migrants. In other words, you can't claim refugee status in Canada if you have not done so elsewhere. So it's an issue, but it's nothing in comparison with the Mexico-U.S. relationship.
But Steve, if I can, there's an interesting opportunity here, I think. Seeing as Steve just mentioned refugee status, I mean, that's an interesting issue that now we could have an opportunity in North America for some kind of, not harmonization, but at the very least coordination of how we define a refugee. Because it's a very, very important issue. Do economic conditions apply? Can you be an economic refugee? Does it have to be something to do with human rights or civil rights, or basic, personal safety? What does it involve? And I think that would be a very fruitful conversation for the three leaders to have. It would need to be led, I think, by Canada and the United States. But it would be very difficult for Andrés Manuel to say no to that conversation, because his entire rhetoric, not the practice, but the rhetoric has been, people are welcome here, come and stay here, etc. And so that could be something where I could see that Mexico, the United States, and Canada working together could actually provide some leadership beyond the region as well, because these are very, very important conversations at the global level as well.
Agreed.
Thank you. And again, this questions would be of great interest to our viewers here on the border, the Rio Grande Guardians viewers, and that is our international bridges currently closed to non-essential traffic as a result of COVID. A measure that we should point out that's supported both in the US federal government and the Mexican government, both sides saying they just do not want to increase the chances of the spread of COVID. But what are you hearing, Duncan, and then Cristina as well, what are you hearing about any chance of the two governments sort of relaxing those issues, particularly with the holiday season coming up? Could that happen before the election or after the election?
So right now, we're on this revolving sort of 30-day or monthly renewal. and there's no sign yet that that's going to end. I suspect that it's going to continue until we have widely available vaccines. That's when we're going to come up against the issue of who's doing a better job of controlling the virus. It's worth stopping for a second, though, and talking about the partial border closure, because remember that this was a Canadian initiative. Canada has a long history of anticipating, preempting US actions. They did it after 9/11 by looking at a sort of a smart borders approach. And they did it again here by saying to the United States, look, we're worried about the spread of COVID in the United States. We think we need to put in place border restrictions. And the United States said yes. Mexico and the United States followed suit. But perhaps the most impressive thing about it is that, you know, none of us who deal with the border on a regular basis or depend upon it, we don't like border restrictions. But in this case, I would say this was a successful negotiation of partial border closings. It wasn't imposed unilaterally by one side or the other. As you said, Steve, the governments came together and talked about it. And they have managed to keep the border open for sort of essential services and essential products to keep moving. It's been really bad, however, for border communities because of all the cross-border shopping, which hasn't happened. It's been bad for families because families haven't been able to get together in the way they did before. And there have been a lot of mistakes and abuses of the restrictions that we've heard about as well. But overall, as much as I dislike those kind of restrictions, I would say that this is actually a good example for us to refer to, where we saw a negotiated solution to a common problem. The next conversation that we need to have in North America is, all right, so after 9/11, we worked towards trusted traveler programs, you know, Global Entry, Sentry, Nexus, etc. Those kind of programs where travelers would give up their information, their personal data ahead of time in order to have an easier time at the border. It's time for us to think about health passports. It's time for us to think about a 21st century solution to that question. And I was on a call the other day and somebody said, you know, do you remember back in the old days when you had to show your vaccination record before you crossed the border? And I wasn't aware of this. It's going to be a 21st century version of that. You know, look at a lot of sports these days, like soccer, like you and I, Steve, we follow the Premier League in England. That when the players show up to play a game, they have to show their health passport on their phone, on their cell phone. It's going to be some variation of that. You will have to submit information ahead of time to the border authorities, which show that in the last, let's say the last week, you've had a COVID test which came back negative. And as the technology improves and as the cost of testing goes down and becomes faster, that will become easier and easier to do.
Maria Cristina, is Mexico ready for those sorts of advances in telehealth to such an extent that our bridges could be reopened?
I know there's some pressure in the border communities to reopen, as have been mentioned. Shopping has diminished, and also I see an impact also on health tourism. You know that many Americans and Mexicans cross the border for treatments. Many Americans come into Mexico because they can face cheaper treatments or a better deal when it comes to surgical procedures and such, and also medications. And that has suffered due to these restrictions, but I am not sure Mexico is yet ready for this. We have to think about the border with the US, but also the south of the border between Mexico and Central American countries. That is critical too for this.
Do you want to add anything, Stephen?
Just a couple of quick comments. I think clearly Duncan is correct that it was a very successful negotiation, was initiated by Canada with the United States. There's no appetite here for reopening that border at this stage. In fact, there have been tightening efforts to restrict illegal American tourists coming into Canada in the last while. There has been, however, and I think we will continue to see, a loosening of restrictions on family reunifications. That's already happening, and I think it's particularly associated with the you know, with Thanksgiving in both countries and with Christmas coming and so on. So I think we will see you're going to have to apply to visit family, but I think we will see some loosening in that respect. But the bottom line is, you know, Canada's done just a wee bit better than the United States on the COVID crisis, and we want to try to keep it that way.
Thank you. Well, I don't think we've had any other questions, at least that I can see, that have come in via Facebook. So, and we've been going now for an hour and 20 minutes. Very much appreciate this. So how about if we give you, the three of you, an opportunity for any sort of closing remarks for this webinar? Maria Cristina, do you want to go first?
Okay, thanks, Steve. First of all, thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Steve Randall. Thank you, Steve Taylor, for this session. It's been wonderful, and it has provided a lot of elements to think about. I believe that the US elections are proving extremely important for the world, and certainly for Mexico and Canada. For Mexico, there are many challenges in the horizon, whether Trump or Biden win, and we should be very proactive when it comes to Biden, because you may remember that President López Obrador, it has been already suggested before, President López Obrador seems to feel comfortable in having a personal relationship with Trump. He went to the US, he went to Washington, he met with Trump during the pandemic, during a very critical time of the pandemic, although the pandemic is, you know, gaining a new momentum right now. But he didn't reach the Democrats at that time. So we need to work more on that, and to be prepared for a more institutionalized relationship under Biden government. We don't know if he is going to win, but it's better to have a B plan than only an A plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen?
I think Maria Cristina has said it. We would really like to see a more institutionalized, less ad hoc, less ad hominem, less personal approach to diplomacy, bilateral and trilateral relations. And I don't think we're going to have that if Trump is reelected. And the bottom line here is, as much as his base may love him, he really has no regard for the rule of law. And that, I think, flies in the face of Canadian traditional respect for law, both national and international.
Thank you. And last remarks, Duncan?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, first of all, thank you, Steve. You've done a great job of moderating, keeping us going, and making sure that we don't say anything too outrageous. Thank you, Maria Cristina, for the invitation, and great to see you, Steve. Thanks to the audience for listening. I would just say at this point in time that, you know, we live in an age where it's actually very easy, sometimes too easy, to get hold of information. But I would go to the official sources. If you want to find out about the options that are available in the United States right now, I mean, go to the campaign websites and look at what they're saying. Inform yourself about this. Don't just rely on what you see on Facebook. We live in an age of disinformation as well as misinformation and too much information. So I would say, you know, go to the websites of the candidates, look at what they're saying, look at their actions, look at their histories, and you'll have a pretty good idea about what's coming up. You know, I don't want to take away any of the mystery of what the three of us do in terms of being analysts, but it's actually not rocket science. It's actually about just sort of doing the studies and observing and then extrapolating from that. And I think that we have a pretty good idea about what to expect from both candidates. And overall, I would say, and I think this has been said many times during this session, the fact is that North America works as a region. It's one of the most competitive regions in the world. And when it came under threat during the Trump administration, when Trump was ready to rip up NAFTA, and I'm reliably informed from people on the inside that there were several occasions where they literally had to take that letter off of his desk so he didn't sign it, pulling the United States out of NAFTA. You know, what we saw a rallying cry and multiple stakeholders from across the United States coming to defend North America. I used to make the joke that Trump was the best thing that could ever have happened to people in the United States who study Mexico, because all of a sudden there was interest, because Mexico was under attack. The same thing was true of NAFTA. He rallied the support for NAFTA. And there's one thing about Trump which I don't think we should forget. Nobody else that I can think of would have taken on the task of renegotiating NAFTA. We talked about it for years. All of us said it needed to be done. It needed to be modernized. And everyone said, oh, no, don't open up that Pandora's box, because NAFTA is a 4-letter word in Washington and nobody will do it. Trump, being Trump, he did it. And yes, it's not a perfect agreement. There's lots of things that are wrong with USMCA. And if I can quote Jesus Ciade for a moment here, he said, you know, just like any free trade agreement, there's one page about free trade and there's 350 pages about all the restrictions on trade. That's absolutely true. But the fact is we made a significant leap forward in terms of modernizing the agreement. And that's a remarkable thing. So when we look back at the Trump years, whether it's, you know, in January of 2021 or January of 2025, we should remember that we have just lived through an extraordinary time. Whether you like it or not, things have changed.
Thank you. Thank you all, the three of you, Dr. Duncan Wood, Dr. Maria Cristina Rosas, and Dr. Stephen Randall. Thank you for being such fantastic guest speakers today. It's been an absorbing and informative discussion. I'd like to thank the Olof Palme Center for inviting me to moderate this. It's been really enjoyable. I've learned so much. Thank you all very much indeed. And I hope the audience has enjoyed it too.
Thank you.
Thank you.